Frank Lampard is on the verge of, he's on the shortlist, shall we say, Rangers' final shortlist to fill their managerial vacancy. This is a story that's just breaking. talkSPORT understands that the ex-Chelsea boss Lampard conducted an initial interview with the Gers board earlier this week. The former Ibrox defender Kevin Muscat also remains a contender to replace the sacked Mick Beale. They, I'm sure, want to get an appointment pretty quickly, bearing in mind that last night they went to Aris in Limassol and ended up losing by 2-1. A very bad first half during that game as well. What do you think about the possibility of Frank Lampard taking over?
It's an interesting one. I said when Frank first went into his managerial career, I was certainly hoping for pretty big things from him. I think he has struggled since the Derby situation. I know they had a very good season in that in opening season with Chelsea, where they weren't allowed to spend any money and they managed to get into the Champions League. But he has had a period, hasn't he, which he'll want to forget about and get back into management. I think this is, I wouldn't say it's a last chance saloon area, but
if you
he
look
has really
at the
going to
record
have
that
to do well
Sean
in this
Dyche has had, especially at home, and you look at the record that Frank Lampard had at home, actually they're comparable, aren't they? And Sean Dyche is supposed to be a much more experienced manager.
Yeah, but when you look at the two records and you look at the number of games, Sean Dyche very much kept them up, and it was down to critical.
Frank.
Well, the records don't compare, I'm afraid.
So Frank
I think
didn't
Sean Dyche's record was better. Simple as that. With fewer games, he had more wins. So it's about winning, isn't it? It's about getting... And what Frank now needs to do is everything he's learned, and he would have learned a great deal. He doesn't want that to be wasted. He now needs to take this opportunity if it comes along and make sure, in a different playground, because he's in Scotland, but nonetheless, they are one of two teams with all the resources, that he can prove now that he has the skill set to be a top manager. He still has that chance, but as I say, those chances are getting fewer. If you're not successful, they're the rules.
What do you think about Frank Lampard taking over at Rangers? It would be good for them. Who else would they be considering at this stage?
I don't know who else they would consider. They should be looking around to make sure that the size of this football club is replicated by the competence in its dugout. Because clearly Rangers are a very big football club. They've got a decent-sized turnover at £80 million a year. They're losing to sides in Europe under the auspice of the fact that the Scottish League is so poor, yet the sides that they're getting beaten by in Europe don't have bigger turnovers than they have. So really and truly, there should be a like-for-like comparison, albeit maybe their leagues are slightly more competitive. I find myself in the unenviable position of being an advocate for Frank Lampard early days, and suggesting that he would go on to have a significant managerial career, using it in comparison with other managers at the time that I felt that he would eclipse. And I now find myself in a completely different position because new information, and of course when you get new information, you should pivot if that new information gives you the opportunity to do so. If it maintains the same perspective, then there's something wrong with you. I look at Frank and say, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, we can give him that first season at Chelsea, where he didn't have a bad side, let's have it right. He might not have been able to go and spend huge amounts of money.
He put a lot of youngsters,
he put a lot of kids
brought in a lot of younger players that were clearly talented players. He couldn't manage some of the senior players like Antonio Rudiger that caused him a problem in the longer
second
game.
season, yeah.
When he was given money with Chelsea, within 5 months, he's out of the door. I don't think he did what he could and should have done at Derby with the resources that were available to him. He got them close, but that doesn't make any difference. He went to Chelsea, got them to an FA Cup final, they lost.
Got them into the top four.
Got them into the top four in a season that I think was probably a strange season at that particular year. And you look at the following season and he's out of a job. He goes to Everton. Yes, statistically you're absolutely right. But the circumstances in which Everton got out of relegation in the first season would have been very different than the second season, because he was taking them towards relegation. He managed to just about get them.
Everyone takes them towards relegation.
Well, not everybody.
Well, pretty much.
Not everybody.
Go back over the course of the last few years.
Well, I don't think Ronald de Boer took him anywhere near relegation, did he? Ronald Koeman, sorry, yeah, Ronald Koeman. I don't think he took him. I don't think Martinez took him anywhere near relegation.
Well, Koeman actually was on a downward spiral. Ainsworth came in, and then Allardyce had to replace him to save him at the end of that season.
You don't bring someone in to compound the problem. And the issue is that Frank was beginning to compound the problem. They got out of jail in that season. They got out by the skin of their teeth, and then they got worse.
Probably the only manager since Roberto Martinez that hasn't headed them towards relegation is Carlo Ancelotti.
You would expect that not to be the case, because Carlo Ancelotti was given an embarrassment of riches and was a top-end manager. The difference between Frank Lampard and Carlo Ancelotti is if Carlo Ancelotti was given
not comparing, are we? Comparing what he achieved at Everton and what Sean Dyche has.
Yeah, but you brought Carlo Ancelotti into the conversation.
Because I'm saying that they all do it.
So my point is...
when they go to Chelsea, though, do they all fail? Because that's what happened, isn't it, when Frank Lampard went back to, albeit as a caretaker manager.
You think Chelsea would take finishing in the top four now?
Well, no. I'm talking about when he goes back just recently.
In the recent times.
after the
that's
Everton
a-
situation.
that's
To
a
go to
non-event,
Martin's
isn't it?
point
No,
earlier
no,
on,
it's not a
season.
non-event.
It
It's not a
is.
non-event.
No,
He's
but
a
it
proud
is.
man. He would have wanted to get good
He
results.
should have done better. It was ridiculous, and things that came out of his trap during that time were ridiculous. The bottom line is that if Sean Dyche hadn't have gone in, irrespective of what's happening at the first 6 games of this season, right? If Sean Dyche hadn't have gone in and dealt with the Everton situation under Frank Lampard, if it had stayed there, they'd have got relegated.
And if Frank hadn't have gone in after Rafa Benitez, they would have got relegated.
Yeah, but they were in the toxicity that Rafa Benitez created in that environment and was always going to create, and the way that football club was beginning to unwind with a whole raft of things going on behind it, were ultimately a situation where you'd have to have been the worst manager on the planet not to have made things slightly better.
Okay, so
I think
what's
when-
your view
I
on it
think-
then? Do you think that he's been
don't
lucky
think-
to get
okay,
the jobs that
can
he's
I give
got,
you
or
mine? Can I
unlucky
give you
with the
mine?
way they've worked out?
I think he'll be very lucky.
I think he should be given the opportunity.
I think he'll be
but
very
I
lucky to
hope
get
there's
a-
an adjustment in his management.
Well, yes,
because
I mean-
everything's not working.
So what does he need to adjust?
Himself.
Well, there's talk that he's very aggressive to the players after the game, very critical. And sometimes when you have a player that formerly as a player has been very good, plays at a really high level, it's hard to take from other players. It's hard to take that they feel that they've had to work harder, perhaps.
Simon would
and
see
their
that as a
game.
feather in his cap.
Well, I would see that as an inherent right.
Well, it's not working, is it? Because the players are just seeing it as criticism.
Well,
aren't they?
if we're working on,
You have to work with your players,
If we're
no?
working on the basis of rumour and supposition, then it clearly isn't right, because if that's his style and that's what he does, then it hasn't brought the results. Moving it on to the conversation about whether he is entitled to a second go, whether he's able to develop. This is Rangers. I'm talking about from Rangers' perspective. I'm not talking about from.
This is a huge club.
I'm not talking about Frank Lampard.
They lost to Limassol
If I'm
midweek.
Rangers Football
Limassol.
Club, I'm looking at what fixes it for me. I'm not looking at redemption for somebody. I'm not looking at whether they can learn on the job. I'm not looking about whether they've learnt their lessons and ultimately can give me a chance. I'm
The
looking
previous
at
manager was a QPR manager
as a
in
dreadful.
his first
But I was
job.
the first person to turn around and say, so QPR give an assistant manager that's never managed before an opportunity. He shows no loyalty whatsoever, goes out the door. Which part of Rangers operating as a big club thought that was a really inspired decision? It went the way it went.
They
Is
were
that not
looking-
the market
yep.
that now that Rangers find
Why?
themselves in? I mean, well, they appointed Stephen Gerrard.
Well,
he
that was-
had zero managerial
But it was a
experience.
different
in
dynamic
England.
And that
between
worked
Rangers
out
at
very
that
well,
time.
didn't it?
Yeah.
And then they're looking at Lampard
Well,
as well,
it
thinking,
went
is this
okay,
the,
didn't
is this
it?
the right moment? Maybe they enjoyed having that big name manager.
Maybe.
That impact that it creates. What I'm saying is about rumours that you hear is that maybe Frank's personality gets in
Do
the
you
way of
think- do you
himself
think-
because of his such high standards.
Well, let's
and that
ask
can
the-
be intimidating
let's
for
ask-
some players.
That may be the
Work
case.
with the players.
It may be the case, right? And if that's something he needs to work on, then maybe he will have recalibrated. The answer to the question is, do we think Frank Lampard in the dugout overcomes Brendan Rodgers and Celtic? If the answer is no, the hell are you doing, Rangers? That's your objective in your life. That's the reasons why you exist, to be better than Celtic.
I can see why they're giving him the possible opportunity. But as I say, it's about him learning. It's more of the derby manager, isn't it? They get
Have
close
we
to the
seen-
playoff. It's
have
more
we
of that
seen-
first
have
manager
we
at
seen
Chelsea that
anything?
you want to see.
Have
in
we
the
seen anything
Rangers manager.
in the last 2 incarnations of Frank Lampard that if you were in a Rangers boardroom, you go, gee, I'm going to point to that one. I'm going to look at what he did at Everton. I'm going to look at what he did in the last 12 games at Chelsea and go, that's the fella for me. You just wouldn't, would you? You'd look at it and go, well, it's Frank Lampard. It's got Frank Lampard's name above the door. That's why it's getting a degree of consideration rather than looking at the body of work.
That's what worked with Gerrard, because they couldn't have pointed to any coaching.
But he didn't have the
CV.
legacy of of an evaluative perspective to go, well, let's look at it. What has he done? In Gerrard, it was a complete leap of faith.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.